When I was in my third year of university, one of my professors and mentors suggested that I spend my summer volunteering at a youth camp. The idea of working at a summer camp wasn't something that excited me, but it was the kind of experience that would stand out on my resume for future job opportunities in my field. Before the school year ended, I started looking into camps near my hometown and found one about an hour's drive away that was hiring counselors. I applied, had a phone interview with a man named Rick, and secured the position. This particular camp began right after Independence Day and ran until the last week of August. Throughout the summer, different groups of kids would come and go in cycles. On July 5th, the day before camp officially started, I made the drive to meet Rick, the other counselors, and the staff, as well as to familiarize myself with the campgrounds, which were quite expansive. I arrived around 11 a.m. and saw a tall, broad-shouldered man standing outside a large lodge, waving in my direction. To the left of the building was a parking lot, and he gestured for me to pull in there. After parking, I walked up to him and extended my hand for a handshake. Instead, he let out a deep, hearty laugh and said in a warm southern drawl, "We're huggers around here, friend." He introduced himself as Rick and asked if I was Emily. Normally, being hugged by a stranger would make me uncomfortable, but Rick had a Santa Claus-like charm about him, except with a dark beard instead of white. Within minutes, I understood why the kids adored him and why this camp had such positive reviews. Rick had an infectious presence that made people feel welcome. He handed me a map and personally guided me through the camp. When we reached the lake, his cheerful tone remained as he said, "I'm gonna have my wife take over from here. I've got some things to take care of, but you're going to love her." I turned to see a graceful woman walking towards us, smiling warmly. In an upbeat voice, she introduced herself. "Hi, Emily. I'm Lisa, Rick's wife. Let me show you where the girls sleep, and then I'll take you to your cabin and introduce you to the other counselors." Walking with Lisa felt much like walking with Rick. She was kind and easy to talk to. She showed me the cabins and pointed out the one I'd be responsible for. Each counselor had a designated group of campers to oversee. After that, we headed to a large wooden building, the recreation hall, where campers would eat and participate in activities. That's where I met my fellow counselors, and we all bonded instantly. I started feeling optimistic about the summer ahead. That night, however, I struggled to fall asleep. Counselors were assigned separate cabins, and mine was surprisingly comfortable. I shared my room with another counselor, Megan, but the space was large enough to give us privacy. Since I couldn't sleep, I decided to take a walk. Megan was fast asleep and didn't stir when I left the room. I didn't feel like I was sneaking out since Rick and Lisa had told us multiple times that the camp was our home for the summer and we could roam freely during off hours. The campgrounds were even more breathtaking at night. The sky was filled with stars in a way I wasn't used to seeing back home. As I strolled, I remembered that I had left my book in my car and figured I'd grab it to read until I felt tired. On my way to the parking lot, I passed by the large white house I had noticed earlier. The lights were on inside, and as I walked by, I glanced in the window without thinking. Inside, I saw Rick and Lisa talking to two men I didn't recognize. These men were definitely not part of the camp staff. I don't like to judge people based on appearances, but they looked rough, like the kind of guys you'd avoid in a dark alley. Rick and Lisa's demeanor was also noticeably different. Rick, who had been so cheerful earlier, looked agitated, and though I couldn't hear what was being said, it seemed like he was arguing with them. I didn't dwell on it and kept walking, assuming it was none of my business. After grabbing my book, I headed back toward my cabin. Just as I passed the house again, I heard my name being called. I turned around to see Lisa walking briskly toward me. She seemed tense as she asked if I had been spying on them. I told her honestly that I had trouble sleeping and had just been taking a walk. Her expression was hard to read, but she didn't seem convinced. With a clipped tone, she said, "All right, dear, head back to your cabin. We've got a long day tomorrow." I returned to my room, but my mind kept replaying that odd interaction. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I fell asleep. The next morning, I felt refreshed despite the lack of rest. Camp officially began as the kids arrived, and before long, I had forgotten about my strange encounter with Lisa. About a week later, another sleepless night hit me. Around 2 a.m., as I lay awake, I thought I heard a noise. Assuming it was another counselor heading to the restroom, I stepped out into the hallway. The cabin was dark, but from the stair landing, I could see the living room below. Two shadowy figures were rummaging through bags. There was enough moonlight shining through the window to make out their shapes. I hesitated, still thinking it might just be other counselors. As I crept down the stairs, one of the figures turned to face me. My stomach dropped. I recognized him immediately as one of the men from the house that first night. His eyes were wild, his face gaunt. I opened my mouth to scream, but fear kept me frozen. He took a slow step toward me, his hand moving toward his waistband. Just then, the other man grabbed his shoulder and hissed, "We need to go now." The first man kept his eyes locked on me as he backed out the door before disappearing into the night. Moments later, my fellow counselors rushed into the room, finding me shaking at the base of the stairs. I stammered through an explanation of what had happened. Someone called Rick, who arrived within minutes on his ATV. When I told him what I saw, I mentioned the men I had seen him with that first night. Rick's response was unsettling. He let out a chuckle and said, "Sweetheart, I don't know what you're talking about. I wasn't with anyone that night." The more I insisted, the more dismissive he became, almost like he wanted me to doubt myself. Eventually, Megan pulled me aside before I could lose my temper. Rick left, assuring us that the authorities would be informed and we had nothing to worry about. The next morning, some counselors realized their wallets had been stolen. As unsettling as it was, we were just grateful nothing worse had happened. When I told Lisa about the break-in, her reaction was even stranger. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Whatever you think is happening here, you're wrong. It's being handled." That was the final straw for me. Since I hadn't signed any binding contracts, I knew I was free to leave. I went straight to Rick and told him, in no uncertain terms, that I was done. He didn't argue, just gave me a solemn apology and let me go. I never pursued the matter further. To this day, I have no idea who those men were, what they wanted, or what connection they had to Rick and Lisa. I had a gut feeling that if I had stayed, I would have seen those men again. I'm glad I left when I did, and I've never looked back. It's been over 15 years since that summer, and I've never set foot in a camp again. When I was 15, my parents forced me to attend a summer camp that was several hours away from our town. Yeah, that's right, I said they forced me. At the time, I had gotten involved in some after-school activities that were dragging my grades down and had landed me in trouble with the law just before the school year ended. Wanting to keep an eye on me and make sure I stayed out of trouble, my parents figured sending me to camp was the best solution. I despised the idea and resented them for it. Now, more than 10 years later, I realized they were just trying to help, even if they didn't really know the best way to handle things. This camp lasted all summer long. It was almost like a boarding school, except instead of classes, you spent your time outdoors doing camp-related activities. Parents could pay for their kid to stay the entire summer or just a few weeks. I managed to strike a deal with my parents, and we settled on me staying for 3 weeks. I was miserable on the drive up there, thinking about my friends hanging out without me, the girl I had a crush on, and most importantly, my beloved PlayStation, which would sit untouched while I was gone. Right away, I noticed that there weren't many kids my age. Most of the campers were middle schoolers, and there were only a handful of high schoolers like me. My cabin had 7 other guys who were at least close to my age, most of whom were the outdoorsy type. They loved hiking, roasting marshmallows, and everything camp-related. I, on the other hand, was an outsider from the start. All of my cabin mates had been coming here for years, and they assured me that I'd grow to love the place, that my quiet and negative attitude would fade. I didn't believe them for a second. I was never into the whole team spirit thing. That's why I never joined sports or group activities. As far as I was concerned, these 3 weeks were just a sentence to serve, and I just had to wait out the time until I could go home. For the first 5 or 6 days, that's exactly what I did. I kept to myself, did the required activities, and spent most of my free time in the common area. It was a big cabin at the center of camp with a pool table, a bookshelf, and, most importantly, peace and quiet. Most campers were always outside, swimming, hiking, and taking part in all the activities the camp had to offer. Toward the end of my first week, one of my cabin mates invited me to go swimming. Well, invited might not be the right word. He practically begged me. I wasn't fond of my cabin mates or the camp, but it was hot, so I gave in and went. To my own surprise, I actually had fun. It was the first time camp felt like something other than a prison sentence. I couldn't believe it, but from that afternoon on, I never went back to the common room. I started spending time with my cabin mates and even met a girl named Anna. Since we were among the older kids at camp, we had a closer connection with the counselors. I liked that they didn't talk down to us. They treated us more like equals. It was always professional, but it felt more like chatting with an older friend than a teacher. Before I knew it, my last weekend at camp had arrived, and I was actually sad to leave. My parents were coming to get me on Sunday afternoon, so my cabin mates and I decided to make Friday and Saturday as memorable as possible. Since I was considered the bad kid of the group, I swiped a bunch of snacks, and we stocked up our cabin for the weekend. Our plan was to stay up all night playing card games and just hanging out, nothing too wild. Normally, I might have suggested sneaking out or pulling a prank, but at this point, I just wanted to enjoy my last nights with my new friends. Sometime after midnight, a few of the guys crashed, leaving 4 of us still awake, playing blackjack and using candy as betting chips. One of my friends, who had been lying in bed but wasn't asleep, suddenly jumped up and yelled, "Whoa, what the hell was that?" His sudden movement and sharp tone startled us. We asked him what he was talking about. He paused, staring out the window, then said, "I swear I just saw someone in that tree." And when we locked eyes, they jumped down and ran. We laughed at first, assuming he was just trying to mess with us. The windows in our cabin weren't like regular ones. Across the top of the walls, just below the ceiling, was a long, continuous window stretching around the entire cabin. But he wasn't laughing. His voice wavered, and he even looked like he was about to cry. He wasn't joking. One of our friends argued that there was no way to see outside clearly at this hour, but our cabin mate insisted otherwise. He told us to lie on his bed and look up at the window. And sure enough, he was right, you could actually see the trees outside. Then, in a nervous voice, he muttered, "I was just looking for the tree, and I think I see a face." I know that sounds crazy, but I kept staring and I swear it's looking right at me. When he reacted, whoever it was jumped down. We even heard their feet hit the ground. One of us suggested checking the dirt under the tree. If we found footprints, we'd alert the counselors. If not, we'd chalk it up to imagination. 3 of us stepped outside, and we didn't even need to make it to the tree. Standing beside our cabin, almost like he was hiding, was a man. We froze. He noticed us, then turned and bolted into the woods. Terrified, we ran back inside, shouting but not loud enough to wake the counselors. For some reason, instead of immediately alerting them, we debated what to do. Before we could decide, one of the counselors burst in, locked the door, and urgently whispered, "Turn off the lights and get into bed." We tried telling him what we saw, but he barely acknowledged us. Minutes later, we saw the headlights of park ranger trucks. The counselor ran out to talk to them, and soon all the other counselors were outside speaking with the rangers. One ranger, a blonde woman, seemed to be the one in charge. We couldn't hear what they were saying, but she looked tense, nodding as the others spoke. Then the rangers drove off. The counselors returned to our cabins and told us it was a false alarm, that nothing had happened, and we should just go to bed. We were furious. We knew what we saw, and they refused to acknowledge it. I barely slept that night or the next. Sunday morning, my parents picked me up. When I told them what happened, they asked the camp director, who claimed it was just a camper playing a prank, that one of the counselors overreacted and called the rangers. But I didn't buy that for a second. I saw that man's face clearly. Even in the dark, I could tell he was at least in his 40s. To this day, I'm still friends with my old cabin mates, and whenever we talk about that night, every single one of us remembers it the same way. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted, I don't know why the camp tried to cover it up. Maybe they wanted to avoid bad publicity. Either way, it was one of the scariest nights of my life, and I'll never forget the look on that man's face. When I was younger, I was desperate to fit in and would do almost anything to be considered part of the cool crowd. When I turned 14, my parents signed me up for a summer camp. I was excited at the chance to make new friends and, hopefully, convince the other campers that I was actually cool, or at least convince myself. As soon as I arrived, I immediately gravitated toward a group of kids who looked fun. There were 4 boys standing near one of the cabins, all with messy hair and a skater-like vibe, which at the time I thought was what being cool meant. The leader of the group, or at least that's how it seemed, was a guy named Danny. He wore a Chicago Bulls cap backward and had the other boys laughing with his jokes. As I approached, I laughed along, even though I didn't understand what he was saying. That was enough for them to accept me into their group. After a few days at camp, it was obvious that I had picked the popular crowd. The younger campers looked up to us, and those our age always laughed at our jokes. We quickly became the funny troublemakers, constantly getting scolded for messing around. This was during the peak of reality stunt shows, and we thought we were just as cool by pulling off wild tricks around camp. Danny even convinced one of the younger kids, Eric, to jump off a cabin roof onto a tree branch, claiming he had done it before. Eric tried it, but the branch snapped and he fell. I think he broke his wrist. Danny never got in trouble, but Eric had to leave camp. That was the moment I started to realize Danny might not be as cool as he thought he was. As camp went on, I found myself getting more and more annoyed with Danny. Maybe I was maturing, or maybe I just saw through his act, but something felt off. At first, everyone adored him, but soon, people started to get tired of his constant pranks, especially when they targeted kids he saw as weak or uncool. One night, our group sat in our cabin, sharing creepy stories from our hometowns. Then Danny, always needing to outshine everyone, spoke up. "You guys think those are scary? Just wait till you hear this one," he said confidently. "I've been saving this for the right time, and tonight feels perfect. I told you my older brother went to this camp when he was my age, right? Well, he told me about an abandoned shack deep in the woods, not in the areas we hike to, but further out. It's haunted. The old caretaker used to live there, but he was caught doing something terrible. He tried escaping but died in the process. Now his spirit haunts the place. On quiet nights like this, if you go there, you can hear the cries of his victims." I didn't believe him for a second. I never bought into ghost stories, but the other guys did, and I could see their faces go pale. Seeing this, Danny smirked and pushed further. "Since you don't believe me, I can take you there right now," he challenged. The others immediately objected. I was the first to say, "No way, dude. Not because of some dumb ghost, but because I don't want to get caught and kicked out." Danny just laughed and insulted me, always knowing how to manipulate people. After several minutes of arguing, he got everyone on board except me. That made me the coward of the group. Then he turned to me and said, "If you're really not scared, you won't mind being the one to go inside first. If you do that, we'll have to tell everyone how tough you are." I wish I could say I didn't fall for it, but out of frustration, I finally agreed. We sneaked into the woods, and once the camp lights disappeared behind us, we turned on our flashlights. There were no trails here, barely any space to walk. I don't know how far we went, but after a while, I saw it. An old, broken-down shack, overtaken by nature. Some of my friends whispered, "No way!" And I started to wonder if Danny had been telling the truth. He insisted I go inside, and even though I didn't believe in ghosts, being in the middle of the woods after hearing that story made me feel sick. The others started teasing me again. I figured I had come this far, so I might as well do it. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The place was bigger than I expected, more like a tiny cabin than a shack. The interior was a mess, with debris scattered everywhere. As I shone my flashlight around, I spotted something strange on the floor, a beer bottle. When I picked it up, it was cold, with condensation still on the wood below. My stomach dropped. Then I saw a plastic bag nearby, with an open bag of chips spilling out. My brain struggled to make sense of it all. I was scared, confused, and curious at the same time. Then I noticed a small back room. Slowly, I made my way toward it, shining my flashlight inside. As the beam landed in the corner, I froze. A woman was standing there. I swear, my entire body turned ice cold. My stomach twisted in fear. She lifted her hands slightly and, in a low, trembling voice, said, "Don't make a sound." She didn't look scared. She looked angry, like she was warning me. From outside, I heard Danny shout, asking if I was okay. I didn't answer. The woman was shaking her head, silently telling me not to respond. I stood frozen. Then, against my better judgment, I screamed, "Run!" and bolted for the door. I heard her curse behind me as I ran, then the sound of her stumbling after me. I burst outside and yelled to the others, "Someone's in there!" They thought I was messing with them, until she came storming out, screaming something unintelligible. That's when we all ran, sprinting back to camp, yelling the entire way. The camp staff was waiting for us, groggy and furious that we had snuck out. I tried to explain about the woman living in the shack, but they didn't believe us. They just said they'd call our parents in the morning, which honestly I was relieved about. I wanted to go home. The next morning, the camp director came to our cabin, looking serious. He told us they had gone out to the shack at dawn and found exactly what we described, along with footprints leading into the woods. For safety reasons, they decided to cut camp short and send everyone home. I was beyond grateful to have made it out unharmed, though the experience haunted me for years. I never spoke to any of those guys again, especially not Danny. I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up in trouble down the line. Looking back, I learned a valuable lesson. Be careful who you trust and follow. They might just lead you into a situation that could be your last. I've always been a big fan of camps, especially summer ones. Even before I ever attended, I loved watching movies about them, like Camp Getaway or Adventure Camp. There was a well-known summer camp in the Northeast that I first attended when I was around 11 or 12. A family friend of ours worked there and was able to get my parents a discount, which was the only way they could afford to send me. I ended up going back almost every summer during my teen years, building great memories and friendships that lasted for a long time. Once college came around, I took a break from camp to focus on internships required for graduation. I also worked part-time at a local supermarket to make some real money, enough to go out with friends, pay my phone bill, and handle other expenses. After finishing school, my top priority was finding a full-time job. I was completely over working in retail and wanted to try something new. I had a few interviews, but nothing solid. By the time June rolled around, my parents had invited that same family friend over for dinner, the one who still worked at the camp. They mentioned I was job hunting, and she said, "Why not work at the camp? They're always looking for help, and I can put in a good word for you." I figured it was way better than bagging groceries and pushing carts. I had a very casual phone interview where I mainly just talked about myself and my past experiences as a camper. They offered me the job almost immediately. The arrangement was simple: work for 2 weeks, then either take a break or stay on and keep working while the session changed over. Some campers could stay between sessions, but the main programs were 2-week overnight stays. I decided to try it for 2 weeks, take a break, and if it went well, maybe work through the transition week for extra cash. The job itself was easy. I wasn't exactly a counselor. I mostly helped in the kitchen, assisted with outdoor activities, and filled in wherever help was needed. I made it through almost the entire summer without any major problems. The kids were well behaved, and nothing unusual happened. Since I wasn't a counselor, I had my own separate living space, away from the bunks. Counselors and assistant counselors stayed with the campers, but staff like me had a bit more freedom. Some people in my position lived close enough to commute daily. One night, I think it was in August, the heat was unbearable. I couldn't get comfortable and spent hours tossing and turning. Finally, I got up, grabbed some water, and stepped outside to see if the night air was any cooler. As soon as I stepped out, I felt relief. It was much more refreshing outside. I took a few sips of water and looked up at the sky when I noticed something in my peripheral vision. Something was flickering near one of the cabins, as if something was moving in front of the light outside. I moved closer and saw something standing under the light near the door. At first, I thought it might be a raccoon or, worse, a small bear. But as I got closer, I realized it was a child. A little boy stood there, pointing up at the light and moving his arms slowly up and down. "Hey there, are you okay?" I whispered. He didn't respond, just kept pointing at the light and waving his arm. "Is this your cabin?" I asked. Still nothing. "All right, let's get inside and go to bed. Okay?" He nodded slightly and walked in with me. I woke up the assistant counselor inside and told him, "Hey, I found a kid outside your cabin. He must have wandered off." The counselor looked shocked. "How did he get out?" I shrugged. "No idea." He sighed, clearly annoyed. "I'll talk to Mark about it in the morning and figure out what happened." I left, feeling frustrated. I didn't know all the camp rules, but I did know there were strict safety measures to make sure kids weren't roaming around unsupervised at night. Clearly, something had gone wrong. The next day was hectic, and I didn't think about the incident again until I was carrying some arts and crafts supplies to the main building. When I got to the art room, a few kids were finishing up projects before heading to lunch. That's when I saw the same boy from the night before. This time, he was standing in a corner, facing the wall. I turned to a coworker and asked, "What's going on with him?" She glanced at him and said, "I don't know. He won't respond to me." I walked over. "Hey, buddy, remember me? Want to go grab some lunch?" No response, but I could hear something. Faint whispers, like he was mumbling to himself. As I got closer, the sound grew clearer. His mouth was moving quickly, his eyes shut tight, whispering rapidly under his breath. I gently tapped his shoulder, and he suddenly turned around with a huge grin on his face. "Hi, I'm Tommy," he chirped before skipping out the door toward the cafeteria. Another day passed, and I was up early like always. I liked taking a walk before showering, before the day got too chaotic. But this morning, a bunch of my coworkers were already outside, gathered together, whispering. I walked up and said, "Wow, you're all up early today." One of them sighed. "Yeah, barely slept. One of Jordan's campers had to go home in the middle of the night." "What happened?" "Had some kind of episode. Freaked out a bunch of the other kids. So a few more got picked up by their parents too." For the next few days, it was all anyone talked about. Each time the story was retold, it got more exaggerated, like a game of telephone. One detail I heard from a senior counselor, though I could never confirm, was that there were strange scratches or carvings under the kids' bunk. They apparently replaced a few of the boards, but that could have just been camp gossip. I haven't been back to the camp in years, but sometimes I think about it, all the great memories I made. And every once in a while, I remember this strange incident and wonder what really happened with that boy. When I was growing up, I never got the chance to attend a summer camp, mostly because my family couldn't afford it. I remember one particular year when I asked if I could go, but my parents quickly shut down the idea since money was tight. However, I was able to participate in sports camps during the summer. These camps were similar to traditional summer camps, except they focused primarily on a specific sport. For me, it was basketball. The camp lasted only a week each summer, where we practiced drills, played games, ate together, made friends, and had a great time. After finishing school, my life took an unexpected turn. I ended up coaching basketball at the high school level, teaching young kids the fundamentals of the game. Following a successful first year as a coach, I reached out to the community to see if there was interest in a basketball summer camp. The support was overwhelming. So before the school year ended, I secured a gym to rent and organized a basketball camp for kids ranging from 4th to 10th grade. The spots were available on a first-come, first-served basis, and once they were filled, that was it. The camp would run from Monday to Saturday, and it would even be an overnight camp. To my amazement, every spot was taken within just a few days. I was excited to begin this journey. On the last day of signups, as we were packing up, an angry man stormed into the gym, yelling, "Hey, where do you think you're going? I'm signing up my boy right now, so hold on." His aggressive tone immediately irritated me, but I calmly responded, "Sorry, sir, but all the spots have been filled. I wish I could take every kid, but we're at capacity." This man wasn't satisfied with that answer. He started making a scene, kicking over chairs and shouting. I attempted to calm him down to explain why we had a limit, but he kept his tantrum going. I felt bad for his child, honestly. Thankfully, the kid wasn't with him to witness the outburst. I understood what it was like to want to give your child an opportunity, only to be told no. Eventually, the man stormed out, ranting about how I hadn't seen the last of him and that I would regret it. As a coach, I've dealt with countless frustrated parents, and I never took their threats seriously. Most of the time, they just wanted the best for their kids and said things in the heat of the moment. I treated this situation no differently. Finally, camp began. I structured it similarly to the basketball camps I attended as a kid: drills, scrimmages, downtime, and fun activities to promote teamwork and character building. My team of coaches and I worked the kids hard on the first day, and by nighttime, nearly all of them were asleep by 8 or 9 p.m. This pattern continued for the first few days. By Wednesday, only one kid wanted to leave, but after talking with him, we convinced him to stay. That night, around 11 p.m., I was doing my usual rounds to make sure everyone was in bed. The camp was held in an old school building that was no longer used for classes, but had been renovated and looked great. To give you a clearer picture, the campers slept in various classrooms that we had converted into livable spaces. It resembled an outdoor camp, but inside a school. After checking the sleeping areas, I confirmed that most kids were either asleep or at least in bed. The gym was located on the other side of the building, and to reach it, you had to walk down a long hallway and pass through the cafeteria, which had a stage where students once performed plays and concerts. As I walked through the cafeteria, I suddenly heard a noise coming from the stage. I called out, telling whoever was up there to come down. I assumed it was just a camper or a coach, though I couldn't understand why they would be on the stage so late. I called out again but got no response. However, I could still hear movement, distinct footsteps. Using my firm coaching voice, I warned, "All right, I gave you a chance. I'm coming up there." I climbed onto the stage and shone my flashlight around. I couldn't see anyone, and now the noise had stopped. Just as I was about to turn away, a voice emerged from behind the curtains. It was deep and full of anger. "I told you you'd be sorry." I directed my flashlight toward the dark space behind the curtain, and before I could react, someone lunged at me. Instantly, I recognized him. It was the same furious man from the signups. He tackled me onto the stage and started throwing punches. Before I could fight back, another coach, having heard the commotion, rushed in and pulled the man off me. The guy was out of control, thrashing and yelling. Once we subdued him, I quickly called the police. Thankfully, they arrived fast and removed him from the building. But believe it or not, this is where things got even more bizarre. It turned out that the man's child had already been signed up for the camp. He was separated from the kid's mother and didn't have custody. From what we later learned, the man wasn't in a stable mental state, which became pretty obvious. The child's mother told us, and the police, that she had informed him multiple times that their son was registered. Apparently, he was upset that he wasn't the one who signed up his son, believing that it was a father's responsibility or something along those lines. It was a messy situation. I spent most of the following day contacting parents to explain what had happened and reassure them that their kids were safe. Thankfully, that was the only major incident in all my years running the camp, and I'm grateful it didn't ruin the experience for the kids. Still, it was terrifying in the moment. Every year before camp begins, I think about that guy. I have no idea how he managed to get inside. All the doors were locked, and there weren't any windows for him to enter through. The only explanation I can think of is that he snuck in on the first day and hid in the school the entire time we were there. Just the thought of that sends chills down my spine. It really makes you realize that even when you think you're safe, you never truly know who might be watching. I didn't realize how unsettling this story was until recently when I told my girlfriend and her friends what had happened. I guess I'm pretty bad at noticing things, and I'm terrible at picking up hints. My girlfriend had been dropping signals for weeks before I caught on, so yeah, I don't overanalyze things much. Years ago, when I was around 14 or 15, I can't remember exactly, I went to a summer camp with a Christian theme. It wasn't overly religious or anything. It just had that name to attract people. In this part of the country, you were either Christian or nothing. My parents thought sending me to camp would help me be more social and make some friends since I was kind of awkward. In a way, they were right. On the first day of camp, I met a kid named Danny. He was wearing a Batman t-shirt and I had a Batman cap. We both laughed about it and instantly clicked. Danny was a lot like me, socially awkward, a dry sense of humor, and a huge comic book nerd. We spent hours discussing comics and what we wished would be made into movies someday. This was long before superhero films were as big as they are now. I think the first Iron Man movie had just come out before camp started. Our shared love for comics set Danny and me apart from the rest of the campers. While others joined large groups for activities, we preferred staying back and just talking. Neither of us liked swimming, so we sat out every water activity. One day, Danny brought over some notebook paper and showed me his artwork. The kid was incredibly talented at drawing. He suggested that I write down ideas for superhero stories, and he would illustrate them. I absolutely loved the idea. It got to the point where I forgot I was even at camp. I was completely focused on our little creative project, and it seemed like Danny felt the same. We stayed up late at night, sketching and writing, completely absorbed in our own world. One night, a counselor decided to do a nighttime patrol. He caught us awake with our flashlights, drawing and writing, but he didn't get too mad since we weren't doing anything really bad. Still, he told us to pack it up and go to bed. We were annoyed, but neither of us were the type to break rules, so we listened. The next night, we stayed up again but promised to be more careful. If we heard anything, we'd shut off our lights and pretend to be asleep. That night, at some point, we heard footsteps outside. We quickly turned off our flashlights and jumped into our beds. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, making their way toward our cabin. Something about them felt off. At first, I thought it might be a counselor sneaking around, trying to catch rule breakers, but something about it seemed wrong. Danny and I slept on the far end of the cabin, so the door was about 20 feet away. We heard the doorknob jiggle, but no one entered. Danny and I exchanged glances. He mouthed, "What is going on?" I just shook my head. I had no idea. Danny got up and quietly walked to the door. He whispered, "Hey, who's there?" First, there was no response. Then, a whisper came from the other side. "Hey, it's Mike. Open up real quick." We were confused. There was only one Mike we knew at camp, and he was sleeping in our cabin. Danny whispered back, "Mike's in here, man. Who are you?" Silence. Then the doorknob started shaking again, harder this time. Whoever it was, they were really trying to get inside. Then, after another pause, the voice said, "Come on, just open the door, buddy. I just want to make sure everyone's all right." Danny made the smart choice. He responded, "Sorry, man. If there's a problem, the counselors have a key. Go ask them." He started walking back to his bed. Whoever was outside suddenly started hitting the door, throwing their weight against it. The first thud startled us, then another, and another. After 2 or 3 hits, it stopped completely. We held our breath, lying in bed, waiting for something else to happen. The silence stretched on for minutes. Then, one final attempt at the doorknob before the footsteps slowly faded away. The next day, we noticed a group of counselors talking in hushed voices, looking anxious. We didn't say anything, assuming it had just been some camper pulling a prank. We didn't want to get in trouble. But something changed after that night. The counselors started keeping watch throughout the night. It seemed like someone was always awake, patrolling the camp. On the last day, we finally told a counselor what had happened. His face went pale. He stammered, "Oh, probably just a prank. Nothing to worry about." Then he immediately walked over to another counselor and started whispering to them. We went home, and honestly, I didn't think much about it for years. But when I brought up the story recently while hanging out with friends, my girlfriend was freaked out. That night, I called Danny, and he remembered everything exactly as I did. My girlfriend is convinced that whoever that person was had bad intentions. Maybe she's right. The way they acted, the way the counselors responded, it all seems strange in hindsight. What do you think? Was it just some kid messing around? Or was it something way more disturbing? I enjoy solitude. I landed my ideal job when I was 21 and relocated to a remote area near a river to be by myself. My work is entirely online, allowing me to design my projects in peace and submit them digitally. People assume I must be lonely or upset, but the reality is I just appreciate the quiet and my own company. A few years back, a family purchased a large amount of land nearby and started a seasonal camp. I was furious when I heard the news and hoped it was far enough away that I wouldn't be caught up in all the commotion. My worst fears were realized when summer began. Every day, I could hear their cheers and activities, sometimes even at night. I tried to see if there was anything I could do legally, but they weren't breaking any rules, just annoying me, which unfortunately isn't a crime, though I wish it were. Took a few years, but eventually I adjusted to the noise. I recall an encounter with one of the camp workers when he trespassed on my land. His smug demeanor is something I'll never forget. He looked at me and said, "Calm down, lady. Didn't realize you were such a grouch," before walking off laughing. After that, some of the older kids would come near my property and whisper things like, "That's where the hermit lives," or other teasing remarks. I wasn't bothered by it and eventually embraced the nickname. Over time, I convinced the camp owners to place yellow markers along my property line to indicate where their staff and campers were not allowed to cross. To their credit, they enforced it. I even heard a rumor that a kid was sent home for stepping over the boundary. I don't know if that's true, but that's what people said. Eventually, the campgoers learned to stay in their area and leave me alone. I installed security cameras around my property and, for years, never saw anyone trying to mess with me. That changed last year when everything spiraled out of control. The camp season started as usual, and I mentally prepared myself for the noise that would come with it. One night, I received an alert from my cameras. It was far too late for any campers to be out, so I assumed it was a wild animal. It was after 3 a.m. when I checked the footage, and what I saw made my blood boil. 3 campers, a girl and 2 boys, were standing right at the edge of my property. They hadn't crossed the boundary, but they were pointing at my house, laughing and nudging each other. Then one of the boys stepped onto my land. That was it. I grabbed a metal cane I kept nearby, ready to storm outside and confront them. But the moment I turned around, they were gone. I wasn't sure if they had run back to camp or if they were lurking somewhere on my property. Then, suddenly, there was a knock at my door. I froze. As I started moving toward the front door, another knock came from the back. I turned toward the rear window and spotted one of the boys standing outside. While I was watching him, I heard the front door open. I know for a fact that I locked it, yet somehow one of the kids had broken in. A smug voice echoed through the hallway. "Hey there, old lady. We just wanted to meet you." I could hear the girl giggling alongside him. I hid behind a door in my back room as I listened to another one of them enter through the rear. "So this is the hermit's house? Think she's home?" One of them mocked. Fear gripped me. I knew they were just teenagers, but it was 3 against 1, and the 2 boys were big for their age. They roamed through my house, whistling and calling me by the nickname they had given me. One of them stomped around upstairs while another rifled through my drawers, going through my belongings. They finally left after what felt like forever. When I surveyed the damage, I felt sick. They had stolen several things and left my house in complete disarray. I couldn't comprehend why anyone would do something so cruel just for fun. I called the police immediately, and they arrived within half an hour. I reported the break-in, but since one of the kids had accessed my computer and deleted all the security footage, I had no evidence to prove what happened. I wasn't sure if I could recover the lost files. The next morning, I went to the camp to inform the owner. He immediately dismissed my claims, insisting I was making it up just to stir up more trouble. Our relationship had never been good, and he assumed this was another attempt to ruin him and his business. His words, not mine. Not long after the incident, I put my house up for sale and relocated to another peaceful, isolated spot. Maybe this story doesn't sound frightening to you, but let me tell you, when you're alone in your home and have unpredictable teenagers invading your space, it's terrifying. If you were in my shoes, would you have been scared too? I know I'm not the easiest person to get along with, but what those kids did was completely uncalled for. It just proves that some people are truly awful human beings.